Hello everyone and welcome to today's Mondac webinar in association with Higgs and Johnson, who will be discussing the latest aviation developments in the Bahamas, a jurisdiction which is rapidly increasing as a favourable destination for the registration, financing and leasing of aircraft and aviation generally. My name is Dan Sampaio and I'm joined by a brilliant panel to take us through today's discussion. Alexandra Hall is a partner and chair of the firm's government and Regulatory Affairs Practice Group and co-deputy chair of the firm's Maritime and Aviation Practice Group. She is well versed in local tax law, corporate and commercial law, legal issues relating to resort development, operations and transportation law and regulation. She has assisted in various aspects of commercial transactions, including securing governmental and regulatory approvals for a variety of businesses. Andre Hill is a senior associate in the firm's commercial transactions practice group, is deputy chair of the government and regulatory affairs practice, and a member of the maritime and aviation practice. His areas of expertise include finance, banking, and commercial law within several industries, including aviation. And Keith Major Jr. is a senior associate and co-deputy chair of the maritime and aviation practice group, and a member of the firm's litigation practice. His areas of legal expertise include matters relating to aviation, asset recovery, and general civil litigation. Keith was the first Bahamian to obtain an LLM in international aviation law and served as the founding deputy chairman of the Aircraft Accident Investigations Authority Board. Now, before I hand over to the panel to begin today's webinar, a housekeeping item. You can submit questions to our panel by typing them into the questions pane of the toolbar on the right-hand side of your page. The panel will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible during our Q&A session, but please do reach out after for any additional information you may require. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to our panel to begin. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you to Mondac for inviting us to have this webinar today, and welcome to our participants to our little fireside chat. We notice we have persons from India, Canada, the Cayman Islands, the United States, Australia, Nigeria, and Antigua and Barbuda, which is a personal favorite of Andre because that is where he's from. So we hope to address as many of your questions that you may possibly have, but as Dan indicated, there will be a question and answer period at the end, and then also you'll have our contact information if you want to reach out to us with individual questions later. So good morning, gentlemen, again. The first thing that came to all of our minds is, what is the Bahamas' advantage in the aviation field? Why should they consider this jurisdiction when they're thinking of financing, leasing, or even registering their aircraft?
Right. So I guess I'll jump on in there. Alex, I think the advantages are both comparative as well as competitive. I think in terms of the comparative advantages, the Bahamas obviously boasts of proximity to and ease of operation into the United States airspace. It's placed strategically between North and South America. It has favorable tax considerations and conditions, considered a friendly flag jurisdiction. And there's efficient local regulation, of course, through a well-developed, what I like to call, ecosystem of aviation authorities, just to name a few. Andre, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Sure. Of course, the Bahamas, has locally available, highly skilled professionals to support, any aviation-related services in connection with the status as a long-standing traditional international financial center. And of course, we also have a reputable and well-developed English system with skilled practitioners who are experienced in addressing sophisticated transactions or disputes, through a court process or alternative dispute resolution. So I really think it as a jurisdiction, it lends itself to being attractive for persons to come here to the Bahamas and, register your aircraft or any finances to take place here.
Wonderful. So certainty, consistency, stability is what you can come to the Bahamas for if anyone wanted some takeaways, which is great. So there have been lots of developments the world is changing. So what are the recent revisions in local legislation that will make the Bahamas even more attractive to the international aviation arena?
So I'll jump in, Keith. As you know, in the first quarter of 2021, the Civil Aviation Act and Civil Aviation Bahamas Authority Act was enacted, which repealed the old legislation, and it kind of revamped and created this ecosystem, as Keith talked about, in the Bahamas, whereby the Civil Aviation Authority is responsible for all the functions carried out under the Civil Aviation Act and any convention to which the Bahamas is a party to. And as part of that revamp, the Civil Aviation Authority is required to have a registry of all civil aircraft registered in the Bahamas and the requisite information, which I think really lends itself to creating a system for persons in the public to inspect and to understand all the aircraft registered in the Bahamas. And they've also, issued extensive regulations and publications clearly setting out procedures and requirements for various aviation-related matters in the Bahamas, which you can also create a kind of a Bible of documents to ensure that you comply with all the requisite legislation in the Bahamas. And Keith, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, and I think in addition to obviously the firm legislative provisions or modernization that you've mentioned, I think the Bahamas is also attractive in that sense because over the last decade or so, I would say there's been a demonstrated and concerted focus on generally just modernizing and revamping the aviation regime in the Bahamas, whether that's through legislative measures or whether it's through domestic and/or international policy. And so I think because of this easily demonstrated focus on revamping the sector, I think the Bahamas has actively demonstrated it is interested in distinguishing itself as the go-to destination for aircraft registration, financing, and leasing. Just to kind of top on to what Andre said, from the policy side, and I think this will obviously touch on some of the themes that we want to cover in this segment. But just this year in June, the Department of Aviation has released its National Aviation Strategic Plan, which is dedicated, to focusing the efforts in the sector over the next 3 years and providing measurable benchmarks in terms of improving the aviation product in the Bahamas, and that's on the policy side as well, Alex.
Okay.
I mean,
Now,
I can also add, sorry to cut you off, Alex, that sometimes it can be difficult advising, sometimes in a vacuum, and with the push to have this new piece of legislation, regulations, publication, and policy, we're better able to advise clients, and clients can have a bit of comfort and confidence, in the jurisdiction with respect to registered aircraft and aviation-related matters.
again, certainty, I know for all of that, for all of us who practice in different practice areas, we realize clients like certainty. They like to go in knowing this is what is required, having, as you indicated, Andre, a Bible that you can work with, which is a wonderful thing that it's being developed for the aviation field as well. Now, in terms of some of the developments, you mentioned ongoing registrations and the like, but what in terms of the new is there a new streamlined application process if you wanted to enter the jurisdiction for the first time?
Yep. So historically or traditionally, the application for foreign operators to operate in the jurisdiction was done in a two-staged facet. However, I think in response to market feedback, the authorities have in fact streamlined that operation and compacted actually into one segment where desirous entities are able to submit their application and have them considered in a timely fashion so they can begin adding uplift and benefiting from lucrative operations in the Bahamas. And that's obviously largely from the commercial aspect. The Bahamas, as you know, has a very durable tourism product as well, outside of the aviation, which obviously work hand in hand or hand in glove, as some would say, uh, with the Bahamas on track right now to experience record visitor arrivals of over 8 million.
Wonderful.
I think it's also worth mentioning that, we have assisted in, the registration of foreign operators last year and this year. And I think last year, we could understand the challenges with the two-step stage process that there was before, and how it was this year with the one-stage process, and how the time it took to get that air transport license, was greatly shortened with the one stage process, and how our clients are happier when things are done quicker.
That's a wonderful development. Now, I know the government of the Bahamas has indicated that it wants to increase the airline registry, an aircraft registry in the Bahamas, the same way there was a push more than a decade ago for its ship registry. Will the streamlined process aid in this national goal of having more persons register their aircrafts in the Bahamas?
Alex, yeah, I think the Bahamas Ship Registry is world renowned, and has been one of the top ship registries in the world for a while, and I don't see why the aviation industry in the Bahamas can't put together processes to aid in becoming a well top ranked aircraft registry in the world. And I think some of the steps that the government has taken, as Keith said, with policy and the national strategic plan, can lend to helping the Bahamas become one of the jurisdictions that persons choose to come to have the aircraft registered here.
Yeah, and I just to kind of tack on to that, I think if you go back to when we talk about the recent revisions in aviation legislation that kind of support that move, in the recent Civil Aviation Act 2021, we've seen the introduction of the discretion of the director to allow registration of aircraft owned by foreign persons or foreign corporations, which is a new introduction. And I think perhaps something that's not touted enough in the appropriate circles, because obviously nationality was concerned before. And I would like to stress there's the discretion within the director to allow it in the appropriate circumstances. And I think that definitely assists with the ease of allowing foreign owned aircraft in terms of the structures and special purpose vehicles they're going to hold them to seek having them registered in the Bahamas.
Wonderful. From the list of attendees, I know security is probably one of the issues that they have. And one of the unfortunate things when persons start talking about potential recessions and downturns in the economy, their increased risk of persons defaulting on financing arrangements. So in terms of being able to realize your security, is this currently a jurisdiction that you are able to enforce any existing arrangements that you have? How easy is it here? And are there any movements to make the enforcement of security even easier?
Yes, I'll jump in as the litigator. Most certainly, Alex and Andre most adequately addressed it in the opening session, referring to our reputable and well-developed English legal system. I think that boasts of a strong tradition. And again, to the themes you've mentioned, Alex, in terms of certainty, we are able to advise our clients with respect to the common law system we have and authorities we have in terms of lessors, lenders, and their self-help remedies. Although we are a self-help remedy jurisdiction, more often than not, I think our advice and our experience has been helping clients still approach the court to get protectionary or conservatory orders in realizing their security, and that's been without issue in any large movable asset, whether it be on the maritime or aviation side. But obviously, there are some steps afoot I'll let Andre deal with in terms of the Cape Town Convention, which we think would definitely bolster this strong position.
Yes, but it's probably a good idea to touch on, the current regime in the Bahamas for registering security interests. And part of the revamp of the legislative framework under the Civil Aviation Authority Act, any titles to any legal or beneficial interests in any civil aircraft registered in the Bahamas or any aircraft engine or parts must be registered in the system at the Civil Aviation Authority. And the Civil Aviation Authority Act also provides that any of these title, legal or beneficial interest is not valid unless it's registered in that system, and that's a new statutory requirement under the Civil Aviation Authority Act. But traditionally in the Bahamas, there's the Registration of Records Act, which is the only piece of legislation in the Bahamas which deals with priority. And where there are competing interests, any security interest would have priority from the date of its registration. And this only deals with goods and effects in the Bahamas. So at the time that any security interest is created, over an aircraft, that aircraft should be situated in the Bahamas at that time in order for a lender to avail itself of the priority thereunder. There's also the International Business Companies Act, which international business companies are incorporated under. And there's also a system whereby you can have a register of mortgages and charges. So any aircraft which is owned by an international business company, which is the subject of any security, this register can be filed at the company's registry. And that international business company would be bound by the contents of that register. And a lender could avail itself of this registration, which also puts the third party on notice of the registration of such security.
You both briefly touched on the Cape Town Convention at different points. I know a former partner of Higgs and Johnson, the late Michael Allen, played a pivotal role in the Bahamas, considering accession to the Cape Town Convention. Do you know what the current status is of our acceding?
Well, from our information, you're right. Michael Allen, who also went on to head the Civil Aviation Authority of the Bahamas before his untimely passing, it has actually advanced to a stage where its realization is, I think, imminent. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much more that I can say confidently, but I do know that a lot of work has been put in it. There are industry groups that have assisted the Bahamas government in terms of considering it. The Bahamas government has made public pronouncements indicating its interest in it. And I do think that it will be before long that we will see that the Bahamas has announced its accession to the Cape Town Convention and the Aircraft Protocol.
How would our accession to the Cape Town Convention benefit the jurisdiction and those wanting to do business in the jurisdiction?
Well, I think that's exactly what persons on this call are interested in, whether it be persons from foreign law firms or banking and securities or insurance brokerage or any other aviation consultancy firms. I think they all appreciate that an accession onto the Cape Town Convention, notwithstanding the Bahamas' well-developed legal system and legal tradition, would increase investor confidence. In fact, under the Cape Town Convention, there's a regime where countries that register to the Cape Town Convention receive a credit per se by certain international agencies. And so having signed on to that, these international lending agencies provide discounts to persons who were to use those countries as jurisdictions for their aviation financing needs. So I definitely think it would assist not only the parties to the transactions, as well as the Bahamas, and persons already doing business in the Bahamas or thinking about doing business in the Bahamas, because it would definitely make it more cost effective for the borrowers, and it would definitely increase confidence and security and certainty for lenders, on top of, as we say, a very, very well developed fine legal tradition in the Bahamas.
Continuing the theme of certainty and efficiency, which seems to be the hallmark of all practice areas and what people want in business nowadays. So turning our conversation to more local interests, we know the government of the Bahamas has indicated that it wants to upgrade the airports through public-private partnerships, ideally to help finance the costs of these ventures. Offhand, how many airports do we have in the Bahamas, and is there sufficient airlift to make participation in such a public-private partnership attractive to an international investor?
In my opinion, I would say yes. There are currently 30 government-owned airports, 29 of them in what we call our family islands, and one in the capital of Nassau. When we consider topping or potentially topping 8 million arrivals, not all by air, but a considerable amount by air, I think that there's room, if we do develop properly and invest in the infrastructure, our aviation infrastructure, we could see arrivals topping 10 million.
Yeah, and just to add, I think those 30 airports, I think 20 are international airports, which, so it can be accessed from anywhere in the world. And I think Keith alluded to earlier about the National Aviation Strategic Plan, which is a 3-year plan. Part of one of the broad themes of that plan was the improvement in the aviation infrastructure of airports within the Bahamas. And I think the public-private partnership program has to do with 14 of those international airports in the Bahamas. So, as Keith said, the aviation industry is really looking to bolster its infrastructure in the Bahamas with as many airports as it has. As you said, I come from a country like Antigua. We probably have like 2 airports, but with the archipelago that the Bahamas is, with many islands, people wanted to visit each different island for its charm. There are 20 international airports, which brings a lot of issues which return to security and having the systems in place to effectively manage those airports.
But if I could, Alex and Andre, I think that actually strengthens the point when we go back to what is the Bahamas' advantage. When you talk about a deep bench, per se, of professionals, whether it be in our professional services arena, law, accounting, or any other professional services that support business. But then just take it back to the core, aviation professionals, because we have to duplicate these models across 30 different airports, 20 of which are international. The standard is the same across the bench, whether it's going to be in a family island or in Providence. And so I think when you talk about confidence and security, when people look at the jurisdiction and dealing with people who are well-versed and a wide pool to pick from, I think that's also an advantage. And Andre's made the contrast, obviously, between other countries that are not archipelagos and that could perhaps benefit from a fraction of the amount of airports that we have here, and therefore I would argue a fraction of the amount of aviation professionals.
But also from a business standpoint, because we are an archipelago, we will always need to have an exponentially larger amount of airports than any other country in the region. So they make a good business venture for somebody who may be willing to partner with the government of the Bahamas, because you can't leave one of our more remote islands alone. And so there's no risk of, I should say little risk of closing an international airport on a far-flung island in the Bahamas and like a land locked country that you can drive to the nearest airport if it's further away if they close something. So that is an advantage from that aspect, even though those of us who live here may not appreciate it as an advantage. Other businesses may shut down. That airport on that island has to stay open because that's the only way for people to leave. So it's a good point. Now, one of the topics that always comes up is corporate social responsibility. We've heard the initials ESG. And at the moment, the 2023 Sustainable Goals Summit is happening in the United Nations now, having regard to the mandate for all countries to have a better environment for the next generation. And as we've pointed out, the Bahamas is an archipelago. So for us, we are personally impacted if we do not hit the 1.5-degree goal that the United Nations has ideally targeted. What, as the country, are we doing to encourage persons to be more environmentally responsible in the aircraft and airline industry and space?
Well, I think from the executive standpoint, as you mentioned, we are a small island state, and our prime minister has gone on record touting, the impacts and, in fact, the vulnerability, in particular, of small island states with respect to emissions. And I think, in line with that public policy position, the Bahamas has also indicated in 2021 its intention to participate in CORSIA, which is obviously the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation. And so, on top of being a small island state and an archipelago, we also are a touristic destination. So, even from a sustainability and feasibility standpoint, it's definitely within our interest to make sure that we approach environmental issues in a sustainable way and ensure that persons that operate from this jurisdiction do so responsibly, I think.
So I'd also add, that the idea of sustainability in the environment is global, and smaller jurisdictions such as the Bahamas often bear the brunt of any carbon emissions in terms of its the ecosystem and the coral reefs in the waters and stuff like that, in terms of any oil spills. So it's important that, although the Bahamas does its part, that each country in the world, globally, also lends itself to having sustainable development in the aviation industry and in wider industries.
Okay, wonderful. And I know for me, this next heading is something that I've had to advise on recently, and it tends to be in the forefront: aircrafts and taxes. In terms of the importation of an aircraft in the Bahamas, and particularly if you were moving to have the aircraft registered here, are there any taxes payable to the government at that time for bringing in an aircraft?
So I think under the Excise Act in the Bahamas, the importation of the aircraft is exempt from customs duty. And I think this was another step, by the government of the Bahamas to attract persons to the Bahamas and build the aircraft registry, as we alluded to before, just the same as to be to the level of the ship registry. And I think this is an encouraging step to ensure that persons do choose the Bahamas as a jurisdiction within which to register their aircraft and house the aircraft.
And what about now the sale? Is that treated any different under law? If you have an aircraft in the Bahamas and you're selling it on to another person, what is the tax treatment at that point?
Right. So that would attract the imposition of the value-added tax, but that's competitive in terms of countries in the region. I don't think that we exist in the era of tax-free or entirely tax-free jurisdictions anymore. I think we're in the game of low-tax jurisdictions, and the Bahamas, I think, definitely is still properly characterized as a low tax tax jurisdiction, sorry. And when you think about the fact that Bahamas also does not have income tax, it does not have capital gains tax or withholding tax, I think for the tax advantage, if we are speaking to any tax professionals on this call, I think that's definitely an important takeaway. Because when you look at wealth management or any other sort of structure in which the aircraft is going to be managed, tax is definitely an important consideration. I think the Bahamas ranks high on that scorecard.
I think you made a very valuable point there, Keith, that we are in line with other jurisdictions. I think for years, the Bahamas has been was focused on being no tax. But while other persons were introducing some level of tax, that we are a little skittish when we mention taxes that are imposed on these sales, that we have to remember that other places do impose taxes as well. So that's a very good point. And in terms of, all three of us have helped airlines become registered to operate in and from the jurisdiction. Is there any tax that's imposed for persons who are flying into the jurisdiction? Do they have to charge value-added tax, for example, on their tickets for customers who are coming into the jurisdiction or leaving the jurisdiction?
So under the Value Added Tax Act, there's a defined term of international commercial services, which includes international transport services such as passengers and cargo to and from the Bahamas. And under the Value Added Tax Act, this type of service is what we termed as zero rated. Therefore, the charging of VAT to customers would be considered zero rated and not passed on to these customers. And then, however, these international commercial airlines would also need to obtain a business license in the Bahamas. But traditionally in the Bahamas, the charging of a business license fee for international commercial airlines, I don't want to say has been waived, but it has not been implemented.
Wonderful. So that's another competitive advantage. So you could come here, you can do business here, transport persons in and from the Bahamas, but your cost of your ticket isn't going to be impacted substantially by local taxes, which is wonderful to know. And we keep on talking about the registration of aircraft in the Bahamas. Are there any domicile requirements for aircraft that are registered in the Bahamas?
Well, not at this time, but obviously the director of the Civil Aviation Authority maintains the power to issue guidance materials, civil aviation publications, and other civil aviation regulations from time to time. But with respect to registering or having your aircraft registered in the Bahamas, I would think that's another chink in the Bahamas' or a feather in the hat to, I think, make the point that the Bahamas is actively demonstrating its interest in distinguishing itself as a go-to place for aircraft registration, leasing, and financing.
So from our conversation, I realized we have hit constantly in sort of certainty, stability, having a well-versed public, the persons who are employed in the industry, your professionals that you can rely on. Is there anything else that you think that persons on this call need to know about this jurisdiction than those high-level points that we keep on highlighting?
Well, from the policy standpoint, I think it's also important to indicate it's not only high net worth individuals that would stand to benefit, and it's not only commercial aviation that would tend to benefit. I think there's also been strides on the general aviation front. If we look at it from a policy standpoint, the Bahamas in 2021 introducing pre-clearance to this jurisdiction in South Florida. I think most persons would be more knowledgeable or aware that the Bahamas enjoys pre-clearance into the United States, which obviously assists the travel. But I think that from the reverse standpoint and to support general aviation, I think it's important to note that the Bahamas has afforded pre-clearance into the Bahamas from ports in South Florida.
That's wonderful. And I know Higgs and Johnson is a full service commercial set. On this call, represented between the three of us, we have our tax practice group, our maritime and aviation practice group, our real estate practice group, our litigation practice group. In terms of the impact of these developments across the sector for our firm and the country as a whole, are you optimistic in terms of the way we're going and any new things that they have put out and indicated that they're going to do development-wise? Or at this moment, are we thinking, okay, we have to stay the course, focus on what we're doing, do that well, and then once we are doing this well, then we start to expand again?
Well, I think, sorry, I was muted there. If I could go back to the point that Andre had raised, and I think it's important to put it on the record. I think when outsiders are looking at the Bahamas and assessing whether or not it's a jurisdiction that may be profitable for it, I think it's important to note that, as we've demonstrated, the Bahamas has a keen focus on this area and developing it. And they've demonstrated over the last decade or so, legislatively as well as through its domestic and international policy. We've touched on the recently revealed Bahamas National Aviation Strategic Plan, which was disclosed in June of this year. And I think if I could just put on the record, the 8 broad themes that plan has communicated for the sector and those wishing to participate in the sector. Firstly, improving airport infrastructure and development, as we touched on in terms of the PPP airport program, enhancing strategic partnerships and engagement. And we know that the Bahamas Air has recently announced technical support arrangement with Qatar Airlines, increasing airlift and improving air connectivity. We've discussed the fact that the Bahamas is on track to exceed its record 7+ million tourist arrivals, enhancing human capital development, which obviously becomes possible by the fact that the Bahamas now collects overflight fees and is able to reinvest these funds, these millions of dollars, back into the aviation sector, improving operational efficiency, financial resilience, and revenue optimization, which is obviously achievable through the ecosystem of what we call the aviation regulatory authorities, strengthening safety and security systems. Alex, you've mentioned that. Positioning the Bahamas as the regional leader in sustainable aviation and air transport services. And I think that's the main point. That's the exclamation mark in this discussion. And lastly, improving innovation and technology. Again, I think everyone on this panel would agree that becomes achievable through, again, like I say, the availability of funds by way of the collection of overflight fees, which has been enacted in 2021. So then a recent development. Obviously, the entire strategic plan is available online at the Department of Aviation, doabahamas.com. But I think it's important when you talk about things going forward, and if we're satisfied, I think that's a sufficient roadmap for the next 3 years. I think we can measure out benchmarks from those 8 broad themes, and we can see how progress has already been enacted on a lot of it. But I'm excited. I'm excited as to what the next few years are gonna bring and offer in that space.
I'm quite excited as well because it sounds as if we are pivoting. One of the criticisms of small island developing states is that we aren't always willing to pivot when necessary. So these new developments are exciting for our jurisdiction and for all of us in the space. I see we're at the 10. It's 10:40. And persons wanted to leave time for question and answer, if anything. Nobody's put a question in the group yet. But before persons start putting questions in the group, Andre, is there anything you wish to add to in terms of developments in the jurisdiction that we can be hopeful with, or you're hopeful about?
Yeah, so I think the push, as Keith mentioned, in the national strategic plan and the 8, theme objectives, and I think that an aircraft registry, or one which is top, rises to the top. I think that's key in the Bahamas, because you see the benefits that we've had from the ship registry. As you know, Alex, you and I do a lot of maritime law, and just bringing the Bahamas as a jurisdiction to come and register aircraft, we have clear procedures, requirements, regulations, all the advantages we mentioned before. I think it would behoove the Bahamas to focus there, and as we stated before, not having any customs duty on the import of your aircraft. I think that lends itself to buttressing that claim to, hey, come to the Bahamas. This is a jurisdiction with well-defined parameters for registering your aircraft, and for conducting any finance here. We have a well-developed system here in the Bahamas.
Wonderful. Well, it appears that there are no questions from the participants. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we hope that we've addressed all of the possible questions that you could have had about the space. And I will invite Andre and Keith to give final words before I say thank you to everybody. Andre, Keith, is there anything you'd like to say to sum up?
Well, I would say, based on the developments that Keith mentioned, we at Higgs and Johnson have developed, specific practice groups in aviation and tax and governmental and regulatory affairs to address, these developments in the industry, and any concerns clients may have, they can reach out to us and go on our website and contact us to further develop any of the ideas and comments which were mentioned here today.
Right. And, in Higgs and Johnson, and as Alex has mentioned, it is a full service law firm. So we've had the benefit of advising clients currently in the current regime, even before Cape Town Convention, on their financing concerns, as well as self-help remedies in the events of default. So, whether or not you're a foreign law firm seeking to instruct Bahamian counsel or any counsel in the jurisdiction with respect to those financing arrangements, or aviation consultants assessing, where your clients' aircraft are best serviced. I hope that in today's discussion, my colleagues and I, who I think have all enjoyed the ability to discuss an area that we consider dynamic and on the cutting edge, that we would have addressed those concerns for you, no matter the industry you're in. And we remain available. We have more bulletins and other resource materials on our website, higgsjohnson.com. We're all on LinkedIn, and I think we'll all be happy to answer any further questions you may have if you prefer to approach us on a one-on-one basis.
Thank you very much, Keith. Sorry, Alex, I just want to jump in there and before we finish and say thank you so much to all three of you today for your insights and your time and effort. It was a really interesting discussion. We really appreciate, as I say, your time. I think it's probably a good sign that we didn't get any questions in. I think you covered a lot today, and there is a recording that we've made of this session to our audience. Please do share that with anyone that you think will benefit from that. Andre and Keith, I think that you've sort of covered what I was about to ask, but just before we finish then, Alex, I don't know if I could leave you with any sort of key takeaways that you'd like our audience to leave today's session with.
Well, in terms of the firm Higgs and Johnson, as I indicated, we are a full service commercial firm. So in terms of any tax assistance for persons who are interested in bringing their plane to the jurisdiction, we're able to assist in that. financing transactions, realization of securities, we're able to assist. And we remain available to answer any questions afterwards, because we've all been participants on webinars, and the second you log off, a question comes up. So we remain available if you need to contact us directly to answer any questions. But from the conversation today, you can see that there are a lot of wonderful and positive developments in the jurisdiction that will help the industry grow. There are also opportunities for investments in the jurisdiction for those persons who are looking for alternate investments, which they may not have considered before. So we hope all around we have highlighted what the Bahamas' advantage is generally, and what the advantage of Higgs & Johnson is particularly during our conversation today. And thank you very much for having us. We welcome our partnership with WANDAC, and opportunities like this are invaluable. So thank you very much for letting us do this.
It's our pleasure. We hope to have you back again soon. And I think I can speak on behalf of the audience saying thank you once again very much for your time today. So brilliant. We can leave it there. Thank you once again. We hope to see you again soon. And to our audience, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.